if there's some lessons I've learned in my journey, if I can share those with people, I get a lot of fulfillment from that. And then just being able to focus more on the family life. That suffered a lot when I was starting growing a business. I definitely, there's a calculation that has to be made every day if you're going to be home for dinner at 5:30 or if you're going to stay and do one more proposal or see one more client. And far too often I convinced myself that client, that proposal, that spreadsheet needed to be done and I'll eat late. I did that a lot. Did it help make the business successful and make more money? Yes. Did it cost me quality family time I'll never, ever, ever, ever get back? Absolutely.
Right. All right. Well, sitting here with the famous Jim Damian, longtime friend of mine. So thank you for coming on, brother. I appreciate it.
Tim, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
It's always fun. So we're going to go through, as I was telling you, it's really looking at people's stories because we were in YPO together, right? And the more we were in that and getting to know people's real stories, I think there's this misguided notion out there that people had a break in life. And so this is really telling the true story about how people got where they are and dispelling the illusion that it's, you had a leg up, you came from wealthy parents. So with that, let's go back. Childhood. What was your first childhood dream? Like when I grow up, I want to be.
That's a great question. I think my first dream, I wanted to figure out a way to just be able to pay for things. I wanted to be able to live indoors in a house like my parents did. I was I just wanted to figure out a way to make, to just think about this idea of being able to pay bills. But the big aspiration I had, when I crystallized on a job, delusional as I was like, you know what? I want to be the president of the United States. So probably, many young kids have that thought. But I remember being like a sophomore in high school. And I'm like, oh yeah, I could totally do that.
I could do this.
Yes. I don't know if it's too late, but I never too late.
Well, I know. So you were born and raised in Tehachapi, right? So at least my experience being born and raised in Helena, Montana was, I was taught that like rich dad, poor dad, right? Like my dad was, hey, go get a job. Hopefully it's one with a good pension. So growing up in a small community, was there more of that or was there more of go to college, get a profession?
My family was very encouraging for me to try and do something different. I grew up in Tehachapi, and when I grew up, there were two major employers. One was the prison system. Right. So we had family that were guests in that system and some that worked in that system.
Right.
But most of my family, all my uncles worked in the cement plant. And there's actually two. There's one in Tehachapi, one in Mojave. So my great-grandfather immigrated from Mexico 103 years ago, and he landed in Tehachapi and got a job at Monolith Cement Plant as a carpenter. Oh. Well, that's where his son, my grandfather, worked. That's where his son, my father, worked. And I had assumed I will probably work there.
Right.
But my parents were very encouraging. We didn't really know what it meant. Go to college and get a career. Those words were said a lot. I'm not sure we exactly knew what that meant, but I was encouraged to do that, even though it was very, nobody had really done it before in my family. So it was a vague encouragement, but they had always encouraged me to try that path.
So you had the support that they wanted you to try something different.
Yes.
Instead of the opposite of no, don't go try it.
No. But I remember I did graduate from high school and my uncle gave me a backpack. And he said, basically in the likely event college doesn't work out, you can put your stuff in here, come home, and we'll have a job for you at the cement plant. And he wasn't kidding. He was like, that backpack will get you back home and we'll get you to work. Right. I was like, okay, well, there's plan B.
So where in that was the pivot where it was like, no, I'm definitely going to college?
I worked in the cement plant in Mojave 3 summers. And I was like, oh, I need an indoor job. I am not as tough as my relatives. I cannot. It's 100 degrees working a 90-pound jackhammer. And I was like, nah, I'm gonna really try this college thing, man. Cause I want to work indoors. This is a rough life.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's true.
I have the exact same story, right? In Helena, Montana, East Helena was a custom lead smelter. So my dad worked there as a purchasing agent. It's like, oh, well, you're going to college, you can get a summer job out here. the working end of a shovel with a respirator on and a hard hat. And I was like,
Now, did he know that would inspire you and motivate you? Or was he?
No, I think he was preparing me that was going to be my life, that I would, hey, I can get you, if college doesn't work out, I can get you a job. I was like, same story. I was like, no.
Yeah.
I want to be inside. I don't want to have a shovel in my hand. I don't want to be standing out shoveling coal or anything else.
Yeah. Well, you see people in those jobs. I'm sure it was the same way in Montana. You see some, they've worked there a long time. They're good, hardworking people.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice doing the college thing, because they're usually in shape. But man, it ages you. You'd meet a person there. You go, I don't know, what's that guy, 70 years? Like, no, he's 32. He's just been in this hot, dirty job. And you're like, golly, man. Those are like tough people. And they do kind of make the world go round. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if it's the same with you, but when I would be there, because it was a union plant, right? And they would almost look down on college, like, well, how much are you going to make when you get out of college? Well, I make twice as much as that.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, well, maybe they're onto something.
Oh, totally. And if you're swing shift or nights, it can be a pretty good gig.
Yeah.
And you're not checking email worrying about payroll when you go home. You're going, all right, I moved that thing and now the country's running, and live better, work union. And, it wasn't a bad existence, but I wasn't tough enough to hack that. I'll be honest.
Yeah. And it's weird, the ecosystems it's set up, right? Like the morning shift was 6 to 3 or whatever. It's all swing shift. So, but they'd all go to the bar right afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was just a routine every day, the same. Go to work, hit the bar for a few hours, go home, and repeat.
Yep.
And that was the other part of it. I was like, I don't know that this is what I want to do either.
Yep.
Although it becomes the same later. So what, core values do you still carry from your childhood? What lessons or core values do you stuck with you?
The first and foremost that was drilled into me was the greatest attribute a person can have is be a hard worker. Be a hard worker. And that was what I watched my dad, my grandpa, my great grandpa. They worked hard always. And that's been a blessing and a curse in my life, because I work hard always, right. Sometimes too hard. And, there's diminishing rate of return sometimes on insanely busy work. So there's difference between being productive and working hard. So hard work, fidelity, to the cause, family, loyalty. Those are things that I grew up in a union house, and hard work and loyalty
were the key.
Were that almost nothing else mattered.
Right. Those are the cornerstones of it. Right?
Yep.
What about concerns or fears? Like, hey, the world's a big place, because my thing was the number of people that never leave their home state the statistics are mind-boggling to me, but I was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Until I graduated Montana State at 23. I think I'd been out of the state maybe 3 times in my life.
Yeah. I think the fear that we had, that I had, I think that kind of resonated as a young kid was like, am I going to have enough money to make it? Mm-hmm. Am I going to be able to find, because I started to realize at a young age how expensive things were. You go to the grocery store, you hear about bills, you hear your parents talking, you're like, man, I make, $20 a week washing windows in Tehachapi. How am I ever going to be able to afford a house or a car or get this thing called gasoline? Yeah. I was petrified of not being able to fund a life.
Okay.
That was my biggest fear. Was just I wouldn't figure out how to generate enough money to live. I was scared to death of that.
Okay. And then, so when you go to college, where'd you
I bounced around a little bit. I picked my first college. I used a ruler to measure. In the California State University system, you used to get a paper application. And as I was filling it out, I used a ruler to measure the school farthest away from Tehachapi on the map. And that turned out to be Humboldt State. So my first day of seeing Humboldt State was the first day of school. It was a terrible fit for me. Great school, but I chose it. Don't kids listen. Those listening audience, don't choose your college with a ruler and that's farther.
Do a little more research.
Maybe a visit. But anyway, I bounced around, did Humboldt State, University of Maryland on an exchange program for a year, and then graduated from San Diego State. Wanted to get a master's in social work and went to UC Berkeley for a master's degree. So
you were
took the education thing, kind of went full bore on that.
And then through that process, because you're bouncing around and trying to figure out life, was there ever a time when you just felt stuck? Like, this isn't going where I think it's going to it was supposed to go?
Oh, many times. I mean, I've always had that, feeling and, bang my head against the brick wall. I didn't love Humboldt State, a great school, but it wasn't the right fit for me. And I was kind of like, I got to do something. So I researched and found this obscure national student exchange program, applied. And one of the very lucky breaks in my life, the person who was going to go to Maryland dropped out. And they're like, do you want to go here? Like, usually you have to apply a year in advance. I applied that week and got in.
Oh, wow.
So just kind of a lucky break. But I am a big believer in try a lot of different things and find the path that will work.
Right. That's awesome. And then we always hit failures, right? So obviously Humboldt was like, well, it's not that it's a failure, but it's like, this isn't right?
Yeah.
So what other failures did you hit that you were like, and then more importantly, like what was your strategy to overcome that?
I think in my college years and my younger part of my life, I mean, most things were failures. Most things were brick walls. And I was just kind of one of these guys who thought, well, let's think about it. And I'm like, let's see how many cuts I can take at the plate. I'm going to take as many cuts as I can. And when I hit it, I'll get a good hit. But my percentage of hits to strike, I mean, in life, most of the things I do fail. But I just do a lot of things. I try a lot of things. And the ones that hit, I talk about those. People talk about those. Like, those are the ones I want to talk about. But for everyone that you hear about, and we'll talk about some today, there's 1,000 failures underneath that are just part of everybody's life.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we hit on, like with Michael Bowers was on last time, and he was talking about that you learn more from your failures. Well, there's two ways you can go, right? You can just quit and be like, okay, this isn't meant to be, or you can learn from it and move on.
Yeah, the expression, I don't know who came up with it. The most recent time I heard it was a guy named Conor McGregor, who's had an interesting story. Yeah. But it's win or learn, So another way to talk about a failure is like, okay, what did I learn? I didn't win, but look, nobody likes to lose. Losing sucks. And I lose all the time still. It's terrible. But you just go, okay, what did I learn from this? And then you get up to the plate and do it again.
And I think you learn more from those.
100%.
Than, the success, and I think Ganesh was the one that brought up when I was talking to him. He said, one of the delusions of entrepreneurship is when you're successful at first and you're like, look, you're going to make a mistake. You're going to fail at something. You're going to make that bad decision. And those are actually harder to take when you've been successful. All of a sudden it's like, what do you mean I can't do this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's a mistake, and other times it's just the nature of life. It's just something happens. Look at the pandemic. Look at, different things with the economy. No, those things impacted businesses. They didn't do anything wrong. They just got dealt a bad hand. And sometimes, though, if you screw up, that's like, okay, I messed up. Let me learn from this. But when it's like, man, I didn't do anything wrong, and this terrible thing happened, those lessons are really good.
Yeah.
It's like the tuition is terrible, but the education's priceless. Right. There's a really tough lessons, especially as an entrepreneur.
So as you're going through all that, though, I think one of the things we all deal with is that inner struggle of, imposter syndrome or, self-doubts and fears of failures. What were those as you're coming out of, morphing out of college? And
oh, I remember, when I first finished my master's degree, and I was a social worker. And, it was like, I'll give you a real simple. And you're working with families who are kind of in the worst part of their life, not the worst part of their year, but maybe the worst part of their, whole life because of some incident that happened. And they look to you as a social worker to go, all right, what's our plan here? Like, I'm in big trouble. And you go, well, I'm a kid, man. They're asking me, and I'm like charged. Yeah, I have a fancy degree from Cal, whatever. But like, if they knew what my own life is like, they're not going to look at me with any kind of authority or a helper. So that imposter syndrome came on quick for me. You go, what am I doing working for the government as a social worker? I don't even have kids yet. Like, I think I paid my PG&E bill late. Like, my tires are flat and my car's out of gas, and I'm like some moral authority that's helping people. Then you kind of realize over life, everybody's doing the best they can trying to figure stuff out. But that imposter syndrome's it's real.
So in that, was there times in the early career where it was like, I'm just going to quit. This isn't what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were absolutely times when it was like, what am I doing with my life? And eventually I did quit
Yeah.
that job. But, that was a conscious decision. There were, of course, moments where you just kind of go around the wall. And I had a mentor early in life and projects going south at my job. And this was when I still worked. I was a young, social worker, administrator for Alameda County. And I had a boss who told me, you never let him see you sweat. He goes, you might go around the corner from a meeting and you kick the wall and go, why did I say that? How did this happen? Because you just got to put on a brave face and never let anybody see you sweat.
Right.
And I think that's good advice.
Right.
So
that was one of the strategies you used.
Yeah.
Any other strategies when you hit that imposter syndrome or the self-doubts?
It took me a while to develop those.
Right.
I think that it took me a long time, but later in life, I learned that, physical exercise was a place where you can go be your fully authentic self.
Right.
You don't have to fake it because your watch doesn't lie on how long it took you to run that mile or
Right,
ride that
exactly.
mile or swim that
It's
lap.
a stark reality, right?
It's a stark reality. You can be real. And so it took me a while, but I encourage everybody that'll listen, like find something physical early on that'll help you.
Right.
That
release
be real,
point. So you're doing the social work, and when did you decide, like, hey, I'm going to just carve my own path, and how did you get to the tech world out of social work?
I had figured out as a social worker, the best social program is a job. And so I was helping people get bus tickets and therapy sessions and all really important things to live a life. But what people really wanted, they wanted an opportunity to make money. They wanted an opportunity to express themselves in a way that would produce something in society and get a paycheck. So I just sort of figured out through my social work experience, that was what people wanted to do. And I thought, I might be able to help create some kind of system where people who want to better themselves can come do that with me, because that's what I want to do. And so I didn't know what owning a business meant. I didn't know what the word entrepreneur meant. I just knew I had some ideas and a creative fire inside me, and that what people really want is a job that is not a terrible job. And could I somehow help create that for myself and for a few other people?
So what was that initially? Was that Stria, or was it?
I mean, the name had changed, right? We've gone through a bunch of names. We first started up, the name was different. Eventually, it took a couple years, but we finally found a 5-letter.com that sort of resonated, and so that was Stria. And so we stuck with that name after a couple false starts. First name was Paperless Solutions, and then actually even before that there was another name. I had it was Techno Social Work, because I was like, social work and technology. It's juvenile, very pedestrian sounding name in retrospect, but it sounded good at the time, like so many things.
You got to go through those, right?
You got to go through those, And by the way, Terrio.com was taken,
Yeah, I know.
Terrio therapy.
That's why it's my Terrio.
Yeah, that's my Terrio. You see? Google probably.
Somebody wanted the expensive one, so I was like, oh, we'll just put a my in front of it.
And look at how great you've done with it.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a run.
Yeah.
So what was the reaction, though, from your family, and were you married then?
Yeah, no, I was married. We had a 1-year-old baby.
Okay, so what was the reaction of, hey, I'm leaving my job to start?
Kelly, my wife, has always been super supportive, and she was like, okay, like, yeah, like, is that legal? Can you do that? We didn't know any business owners.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, no, I've looked into this. Like, it's legal. I can start my own company. Like, okay. And then it was a lot of difficult conversations moving from the Bay Area, where I was working, back here to Bakersfield to start the company. No, but people were supportive. Family was supportive. There was a few people who were like, what kind of pension are you gonna have? How many paid days off? And I was just like, I don't know. Like, we'll figure that out eventually.
It'll all come around, right?
Yeah. But I mean, I'll tell you, Tim, people ask this a lot. Like, this is an important point. In my experience, once I realized I could do this thing called entrepreneurship, that was the only thing I could see. Once the realization of that was an option, it wasn't an option. It was like, oh, I must do this.
Right.
Like, it wasn't like, should I, shouldn't I? I just, once I realized it and that thought came into being, it wasn't a choice. It was an imperative. It's like, oh, that's who I am. It's no different than, choosing to be from Earth. Like, now that it's just who I am.
Right. Yeah. So it clicked in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was in my early 30s when I started Terrio therapy. And
yeah.
I hadn't even contemplated it up until that point where I was, if I like, I don't like working for other people. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to try it. And if it fails, hopefully I'm young enough to recover.
Yep.
So luckily it worked. So, but as you're going into it and the reality of entrepreneurship kicks in, self-doubts and like, oh my gosh, did I make the biggest?
Yeah. Gosh, did I make the biggest mistake of my life? We talked about this before we started the show. The first few months, we had customer and money and like, it was great. Like the first month, 2, 3 months, 4 months was awesome. Kind of honeymoon period. And then reality set in. It's like, where's our second customer? I don't, have the money's not coming in. What do we do? Customers start asking for these things like insurance policies. I'm like, what's that? What do you mean I can't just write a personal check to the people that worked here for the 3 hours? So it was a lot of hard knocks. And it was, it definitely felt like imposter syndrome because I was saying, yeah, I'm this business owner. I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. Not at all. It wasn't a syndrome. I was an imposter. I was saying, yeah, I'm a business person. Yeah, I technically owned a business.
Yeah.
But like, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah. So you'd come through that, right? So I was a physical therapist. I had a profession, but it was, when I started, it was like, oh my God, I don't know one thing about this, all that same stuff, right?
Yeah.
Setting up. What do you mean? Oh, okay. I need a what? Like, you want to hire an employee? Okay, great. And luckily, Holly Kilhane, was like, I'd connected with her. And I was like, all right, what do I do? So I put a little advisory committee together with Holly and some others. And like, she's like, well, you need an employee handbook. I'm like, okay, where do I get that? She goes, well, we can create one. And I was like, okay, how much is that going to cost? She's like, well, let's just give you the template version at first. And we'll customize it later. It's like, okay, how much is that going to cost? Because right now I'm spending money. I'm not making anything. This thing's not going. So you got Stria going. What was the turning point in there where you're like, man, this thing can grow big? Because you guys got up to what, 100?
Yeah, we had 150 employees at the end. I think for me, when I took on, I should say this, when I found my 2 business partners that we grew together. So Scott Garrison and Rory Banks became my 2 business partners. And that's when we kind of felt like we were onto something because we started getting customers from other parts of the state, other parts of the country. And then we go, okay, we're not just dealing with local people that kind of know us, like, and trust us, which was how we started. Now we have a skill set and a model where we can go nationwide from here in Bakersfield. And then that's when we go, okay, we have something special.
Right.
It was kind of trading dollars, for a while. And then once we started seeing that growth out of town, that was when we kind of put our heads together and said, okay, we're on to something. We made it through the early struggle, and we actually have a shot at building something good. Well,
like we were talking about earlier, those different phases of business, right? And that if you're in the 100 to 499, you're in 2% of businesses in America, right? Mm-hmm. So at least for me, it was like, I was just the typical entrepreneur outgrowing my problems until I couldn't. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I need to create some infrastructure here. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to do it, right? So that's when I started bringing people in, like, I got to find somebody to run the business side because I know the therapy side, but this is getting too big, like too many employees, too many HR issues. Mm-hmm. So when was that in your...
when we started get up to the 30 person range, it was like, okay, I cannot do payroll. And so we just started hiring. And the problem is, good, talented people should rightly expect to get paid. Mm-hmm. You're going, well, gosh, we were making money, but I was doing everything. Mm-hmm. Now I got to get more customers and more employees to make more money to pay for the back office people that are desperately needed. I always use the analogy. It's like putting a spaceship in orbit. The heavier the spaceship is, the more rocket fuel you need. Right. But the more rocket fuel you have, the heavier it gets. Right. So there's this like calculation
that balance, right?
That balance is like really tough. Right. And but that's what it took to go from kind of like an owner employee to a little bit more of a CEO. And I wouldn't say I ever mastered that, but certainly got to the point where we built that infrastructure and had a team that, was running a sustainable business.
Yeah. And I think that's what I look at it as. You don't even, because if you're in it, like when it's growing, you're not really like paying it. It's just growing. But then at some point you realize I've created this monster, this beast that needs to be fed.
Yeah.
And so
Oh yeah.
all of a sudden business starts to slow down. You're like, oh my God, you're back to like when you were talking about being a kid. How can I afford this house? At least I had several of those moments where, oh crap, I got payroll due.
Boy, it just seems like every other day is payroll day. When you're running a business and you just go, golly,
it can't be time to pay.
Yeah, it's like what? And then there are these things. I remember we had our payroll set up in a kind of unique way, and there was 2 months out of the year where it was 3 payroll months.
Oh yeah,
and we were just like, oh my God, like. And if anyone that makes payroll that has 3 payroll months, you're just like, these are the worst months ever. You're like, how can it possibly be time? When you're getting paid as an employee, 2 weeks is forever. When you're the owner and you're trying to fund payroll, every 2 weeks is just like, it's a day. You go to sleep, you wake up, it's payroll Thursday, and you're like, oh my gosh. And then I never forget the relief. Even when we had plenty of money in the bank and we were like, okay, just going, all right, made another payroll. It was time to celebrate. Up until the day we sold the business, Tim, knowing that we made payroll, and then especially later in the business journey where it was no sweat. We would just make payroll. I still felt good. And one of the proudest things I can say is I never missed a payroll. I never, ever, ever missed a payroll in 18 years of running a business. No small feat. Small feat.
Well, and we talked about the failure rates. That's what you hear about all the time with entrepreneurship, right? Like, it's like 50% fail by 5 years.
Yeah.
It's so, did you ever take time to like celebrate, like, oh my God, we celebrate payrolls, but at least for me, it was like, for whatever reason, we never celebrated like hitting milestones. It was just on to the next payroll
Yeah. I mean, I would take those moments. I don't know if it was a celebration, more of a relief, like the sigh of relief, like, okay, we did it again. We applied for this really cool award called the Inc. 5000. And we were on that list 5 times. Right. And the 5 times we got that, we took a night and we said, you know what, with the partners and our staff, we go, this is special. And the good celebrations were few and far between. They never seemed as loud as the darker days. They were kind of like, all right, good. But we tried. We could have done a better job of celebrating the wins.
Right.
And then we really had what we thought was the sweetest win that kind of got sabotaged.
Yeah. We're going to get that.
Yeah.
Well, I know, having done it and grown the business, Mo and I were talking about this, like, you don't really pay attention to the numbers changing. You just add in zeros, right?
Yeah.
It's like, because when I came out, I was making, as a therapist, I think I was making like 70,000 or something in the late 90s. And I was like, that's more than anybody in my family ever made.
Yeah. You can buy a house and a car.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're
so we're good.
You're done.
And then all of a sudden, fast forward to however many years into running Terrio therapy, I'm like looking at payroll numbers, like, how is this possible?
Mm-hmm.
And now I look at it and it's like, but you almost get somewhat numb to, like, it's just another number.
Yeah.
And the only real number that matters is the bank. Like, okay, that's a huge number, but do we have a bigger number in the bank? That's what I looked at.
Yeah.
Even when I meet with Ken, he knows I don't read anything. So he like graphs everything out for me, but like, okay, we're good.
Yeah. No, that's cash on hand.
Cash on hand.
That becomes one of the key. And that is these businesses you talk to, 90% go out of business within so many years, whatever it is. Really, the only cause of death in a business is running out of money.
Right.
I mean, you can survive without customers. You can survive without employees. You can survive without a website. Once you are out of money, that is the number one, really, as far as I can calculate, the only cause of death for a company, unless you just choose to shut her down. But if you die as a company, it's because you ran out of money.
Right. Cash is still king, right?
Yes,
they don't talk about it as much as they used to, but it's still.
No, 100%. And I always tell startups, like, just planning it to take twice as long and cost twice as much.
Right.
And you'll still be a little under.
Right.
What you think.
It's not an easy trip.
No.
So let's get into that. So you're rolling along, and how did the whole thing with Bitwise come about? Did they approach you?
No,
Or were you guys looking at?
So it had been 18 years, and I'd kind of set some goals. My partners and I had set some goals, and I got to be honest, I was done. I felt like I was done with running that company, Stria. We founded it, we grew it together, we accomplished the milestones that I had set in my head, and I wanted to be done, and I wanted to either hire another CEO or sell it. We really couldn't think of we didn't have a plan or think we could do a hired gun kind of model. So we said, let's list it for sale. We put it up for sale and had a couple offers that were legitimate. And one was this company in Fresno called Bitwise, who was very famous at the time. And it raised, $100 million in private equity to do what we were doing. And so we thought, well, we kind of need to join forces if we want to see our baby grow. So let's sell to them.
Okay.
And they made an offer that was more than the other guys. And it was a business transaction, but also we thought we were picking the right, entity to absorb our company and our clients and our staff.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, they were everywhere for a while. They were.
Yeah. I mean, and I, as an entrepreneur, I'm going, yeah, they really got it right, man. I guess I just kind of missed the boat. I haven't been able to raise $100 million, and I haven't been able to be on the cover of Forbes or do a TED Talk or any of that. Right. Well, they're bigger, badder, better, and and we didn't sell because of them, but when they made the offer, it was like, well, yeah, of course,
right, yeah, this makes sense.
Yes, yes, we thought it was a great deal,
and have a small piece of a huge pie.
We're thinking IPO, man.
Oh yeah.
We were like, we're going to go public with this thing, and I'm going to be, I'm going to be part of that. We were fired up about that.
So I think it's been well publicized, but for those that don't know, it all of a sudden the wheels came off. So when in that, did you realize early, or were you shocked? Like, from the reports I've read, there was a lot of people were just like, what?
I saw signs. So after the transaction, everything was great, and the numbers were going up. Our revenue was, our business unit became a Stria business unit. We were part of Bitwise. Our revenue was going up, profit was going up, cash was going, everything was clicking because we had additional resources.
Right.
So the plan was working. So for the first few months, I'm going, man, we're the smartest guys in the world. Right. We've made this great deal, and we're going to hit our numbers. We're going to get paid all this money in a year, and we're going to get all this equity because we got a small down payment. When we closed the thing, I sold it. But a couple funny things start happening. One is we started getting payroll checks that were not on pay statements. It was just like AP checks, just like no taxes with it, just like your net number. Because and so you go, oh, there's no deductions listed. It's just like an AP check. And the money was right, but it was like, I guess they took taxes out but I having run a business, I go, actually can't do that. Like, and then maybe there was an issue and one time,
reporting,
whatever. Then you go, well, 2 times, 3 times. So I'm raising the alarm, with HR. I'm going, guys, I don't know who's controlling these decisions. We can't do this. And then 401k deductions were withheld and not put into our 401k accounts.
Uh-oh.
And that spread out over a few months. And that's when I knew I had a suspicion that it was more than just startup turbulence. Because, stuff happens. God, you as well as I know, sometimes there are these weird things. You just got to figure it out. And then you kind of make it like this was a repeat cycle of, and then like credit cards would not work because they hadn't been paid. You start hearing about maybe insurance. Somebody's got cut off, then reactivate. So there was some red flags, after we had sold that made me nervous enough to start asking questions to the owners, to the CEOs, to HR. And the answers I was getting back, I was like, okay, we've got a serious problem.
Okay.
But at that point, we had already sold. We hadn't been paid.
Yeah, there's no reverse, right?
No, there's no reverse. We sold, but we didn't get the money. We just gone, all right, maybe it'll all work out. But I was nervous. My partners and I were all nervous kind of into that first year of being an entity that they owned. It was like, there might be problems.
Right. So did you ever get paid the initial down payment?
We got the down payment. It was a deposit, a 6-month payment, and then the big money was in stock and year 1 and year 2. So it was an earn out. So we got a little down payment. Luckily, we had a successful business for 18 years. So it's called a cash-free, debt-free asset sale. So we paid off all of our bills, all of our loans, what was left over in the bank we got to keep. So it was still a very sizable payday, but only because we had accumulated a little bit of cash as a company very little money from Bitwise ever made it into our pockets. We had basically what we had saved as a company for 18 years.
So what was the timeline from when you sold to their ultimate collapse?
We sold in August of 2022, and it was August of 2023 we were supposed to get our big number.
Okay.
And they collapsed in May of 23.
Okay. So
May
less than a year in.
Oh yeah. So like 8 months, whatever it was. And we got a Memorial Day weekend, an email, urgent but optional staff call at 8 p.m. on a holiday Monday. So, you figure either something's gone terribly wrong or maybe somebody had died. I jumped on this Zoom and it was like, okay, everyone's fired or furloughed. They use the term furloughed, and your last paychecks will certainly bounce, and we'll let you know what the plan is. And it was like,
shockwaves.
Yeah, well, we had a very successful, profitable division, so we'll be back to work tomorrow. We're not going to be furloughed. We're the solution to this thing. They're obviously short on cash. We're making money. They're going to keep this thing going.
Right.
That's what we thought.
Right. So that denial phase of, no, it's good.
Yeah, well, we go, I don't know, what are there, a couple $1 million, $10 million, they're out of money, we'll get a loan, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And then the media came out, no, they've borrowed essentially $200 million from banks and lenders that is all gone. So this wasn't a small problem that a mighty little engine called Stria could dig out of. This was a 1,000-person case of fraud, as it eventually came out, and they had stolen money, and we were sort of,
So the timeline's still really quick, right? So 23, they say, hey, we're done.
Yeah.
And then how many days ago was it that the sentencing came down for?
Yeah. So, that was on Tuesday. So
yeah.
two days ago. And I hadn't thought, I'd kind of moved on in life emotionally. I feel recovered and looking at the future, kind of moved through that. It took a year, to process the trauma of seeing your life's work, or part of your life's work, kind of squandered. And I got a call from a guy in Fresno that goes, I don't know if you know, but sentencing is next on Tuesday. We'd like you to come down and speak at the sentencing. And I was real reluctant because I hadn't thought about it or talked about it for a long time. Like I said, I've moved on, but I went down and I didn't make public comments, but was there, and it was kind of a moment of ultimate closure. I had felt closure months ago. Well, that was the ultimate closure to be in the courtroom when the judge handed down the sentence.
Yeah, I think the one got 11 years and one got
11 years and 9 years. And then, on one hand, for the lives and money that was stolen, it seems like not enough. But then on the other hand, these are two humans who, that's a long time. One of the guy, Jake, he has 3 little kids, so they didn't do anything wrong. I agree with that. So it's cold comfort. I take no joy in the fact of seeing this happen. I do think these are people that just got out over their skis and started making some really, really bad decisions that then turned into criminal behavior. I don't think they set out to do that, but they certainly did it and are going to have to pay a very heavy toll, a very heavy price for their mistakes, their misdeeds.
So I think it's a good segue into like our inner compass, like that we're always following. And I think that's a perfect case of somebody that probably started with the right intentions, but somewhere along the line, their compass got off and they ended up in a place they never saw. So how did you, as you were growing Stria and having gone through this, I mean, it was just, and that would, my first thought when it came down was, oh shit. Jim and Stria, like, oh.
That was my first thought. You and I were on the same page.
I was like, what?
No. And dude, yes. It's embarrassing. First you think about, okay, I'm never going to get paid, which is,
right.
Look, you think you're going to get these big checks. You go, man, I'm going to be paying for college for distant relatives. I'm going to have a couple beach out. In reality, none of that stuff's needed, but boy, it sure would have been nice, and it didn't work out. But then you go, for me, the biggest thing was it fed right into that imposter syndrome because I really, tried to be a good stand-up community business guy. And then you kind of adopt that model. Like, yeah, I built and sold a successful tech company. That's cool.
Right.
And then you go, guess what? The front page says you got had. You fell for it.
Oh,
and, it was really embarrassing. Really embarrassing.
Yeah, because there's always I think the weird part of American culture is we love the underdog story, but then we love to tear people down.
Oh,
right?
yeah. That's Schadenfreude. And I can't tell you how many people, when something bad happens, they go, yeah, we kind of knew it, you know,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Every hindsight's 2020,
Yeah,
right?
and you're like,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
but that, you know, that is the thing. People love the underdog story. But gosh, when something goes wrong, man, they want to rip into you.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and it's just like, well, okay. And I mean, you got to take the good with the bad in life, but it's it is an interesting phenomenon. You're right. We love the underdog story, but we equally love that like salacious, what do they call it? Schadenfreude. We see somebody else kind of suffering and you don't really like it, but there's a small little sense, some deep, dark part of our humanity where you go, yeah, maybe they kind of deserve, you know, it's just, it's an ugly part of the human condition.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, because I'm still big into sports, but one of the ones I think recently was like the Brock Purdy, right? So the quarterback for the 49ers, Mr. Irrelevant, becomes a starting quarterback, which should be just, it's unheard of.
Yeah.
But man, it wasn't long before the haters came out like, oh, he's not that good. It's just because he's on a good team. And then I was like, why are you tearing this kid down? This kid should be at a job somewhere.
Yeah.
He's still a starting quarterback.
Yeah.
In the NFL, which is very few, right? 32 of them in the world.
Yeah. That's a weird part of human nature. And I think, you know, you just look on ESPN or look on social media, look at X, look at TikTok, look at, you know, some of these social, and it's like people love to celebrate, but boy, if they find something, a chink in the armor, man, they want to let people have it. And then you pile on. It's a weird, and everybody does it a little bit to different degrees though. It's just a weird part of humanity where you go, and I think it makes people scary because you go, dude, that will be me. I will screw up. I will drop that plate of food. I will be the guy that, you know, has freaking, you know, toilet paper stuck on the bottom of a shoe walking through the mall that somebody films. You go, people are going to just rip me apart. And that it's like unnerving, you know?
Oh, yeah.
You want to just like stay home.
Yeah. If you put yourself out there, which I think is part of it. Like, I know just over the years, there's just people that, as you're growing, like you get involved in the chambers and you get involved in Rotaries and this persona grows, right? Like you said, the successful business. Oh my God, this guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I always said from the beginning that I don't know if people like to watch entrepreneurs take off or the ship explode more. I think it's somewhere in between, right? Like back to your rocket.
Yeah, they might want to see both,
right?
You know,
oh, that's really cool. Look at that rocket went into space. Oh, that's even cooler. It blew up.
Yeah, yeah.
What?
Look, they put all these guys in space. That's so cool. Hey, guess what? They're all stuck there now. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy waiting to happen. Like it is nothing good about this. You know, some of these stories people, you know, they take pleasure in kind of like the downfall or the problems people go through. And it's an ugly part of humanity. And we all do it to one extent or another. I mean, it's like you slow down when you go by that terrible car crash. You're not cheering for it, but you'll take a look.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's an ugly part of humanity. Yeah, it really is. And that goes back on the entrepreneurial journey. And I think the human condition, the human experience, the human expedition, right? The fundamental thing is why. I mean, if you go in to start an entrepreneurial endeavor because you want to make a lot of money, it might be very unsatisfying. If you go in to become famous, it might be very unsatisfying. If you go into it because you want to be part of that game, that ecosystem of rolling the dice, trying it out, working hard, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, you're going to probably have a good time whether you succeed or the business doesn't succeed. But if you go into it for any other reason, I think it's miserable. I think it could be miserable.
Oh yeah, you can see people just get stuck in it, right? Like, well, what do I do? Right? Like, do I just shut it down?
Yeah.
Take the egg on my face and say, all right, I tried it and failed. And I think there's even those people that if it does, they're just like, oh, I told you so. Like you said earlier, everybody has that hindsight's 2020 that, oh, I knew this wasn't going to work.
Yeah. No, totally.
Okay. Well, I still jumped in and tried.
Right? Yes. What's the great, who wrote The Man in the Arena, that speech or that poem? Was it Roosevelt?
Yeah, I think that was Teddy Roosevelt.
And it's like, you know, to the person in the arena that gets knocked down and gets up, at least they tried. Right. And I think entrepreneurs that are going, hey, at least I went for it. At least I tried. Maybe you grab it, maybe you don't. But if your reason behind it is just to have the thrill of the experience, to see what might happen, then you're going to be okay. But if you go, I got to make $1 million in 10 years or 5 years or 1 year, That's tough.
Well, I think it's interesting because of Silicon Valley, right? It skewed what people thought was possible because there was so much money. Like, how the hell are these companies? And I'm sitting there like bootstrapping, growing my company. I'm like, I must be nice.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you get millions of dollars to try.
And then they still go out of business. So 90% of them still fail. And you go, well, somebody gave you these millions of dollars. That's a weird culture. And we idolize that too. You go, well, you know, so you got to spend money to make money and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, some of that's true, but it can be a bridge too far when you try and be like, well, I'm going to be the next Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Bill Gates. Like, don't use that as your North Star because those are flukes.
Right.
The main down the street business, in my opinion, it's 3 yards in the cloud of dust for a long time with a lot of pain. And every now and then, you know, you get some big hit. Like for our case, we sold the company. We're heroes. Great. Smartest guys in our lineage.
Right.
Oh, guess what? No, you're not. You didn't get paid. Oh, well.
Yeah.
You know,
let me get the egg off my face.
But and I think in our moments as entrepreneurs, we go, well, and just as humans, we go, I was here for the experience, not to get too Buddhist on you, but you know, just the experience of the moment of life and this journey. That's where the beauty will show up in my experience.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's because I know for me, as the company was growing and you're looking at the lives that you actually impact, you know, all your employees and all their kids and all the ancillaries and the organizations you can help support. And all of a sudden it's like, I mean, just jumping into your shoes for a second, it's like, dang, but at least I had that time, right?
Yeah.
So there's not that regret later in life where you're going to sit there and go, man, I wish I would have given it a shot.
Yeah.
So that all happens. So then you went at the county, right? So how long was it between the total collapse of Bitwise to taking that position at the county?
Well, about 6 months into my tenure as an employee at Bitwise, I kind of had the realization that it probably wasn't a good long-term fit for me. I was going to stick it out for the year and then move on. I sold for a reason because I was kind of done with that chapter. So I actually got a call from the CAO of the county and said, we have this position called Chief Economic Development Officer. Would you be interested? And I Googled what is a Chief Economic Development Officer. And I go, absolutely, this sounds awesome. And so it's been a real privilege to serve in that capacity with the goal of, you know, about 18 months, helping the county be a more business friendly county, helping guide fellow entrepreneurs to the resources that are available. So it's been an honor to serve in that capacity. And I've really enjoyed the time at the county.
Right. Okay. So is that kind of a gap bridge kind of like,
yeah.
Hey,
and I had that teed up before the implosion.
Oh, okay.
I had kind of like said at the year mark, and then I called Ryan Alsop, who was the CAO, a really great guy, and all the CEOs that I've had the pleasure of working with have been fantastic. But I called Ryan. I said I might be available a little bit early. He goes, "Oh, great!" And then everything came out in the media. He's like, "Oh, this is why you're available." And you know, they stuck by me, and it's been a great tenure at the county. But I had it teed up before the implosion.
Yeah, which is
luckily.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it was smart that you had that foresight to be like, hey, I'm not going to be here that long anyhow. And that was one of my curiosities when I saw you got that job was because I don't know that I could become an employee again. I'm a horrible employee. Like
I convinced myself, and I really thought, look, I loved working for the government. I thought, you know, it was a time limited thing. I never thought I'd work there for another 30 years, but I liked there are pros and cons to that. It's nice not having to worry about payroll.
Right.
It's nice not having to worry about insurance. You know, in the private sector, when you have a customer who's unhappy or there's a problem, usually you write a check or you figure out, you know, some concession. The government's different. You're just there to serve and try. You know, my North Star for the last 18 months has been to help make Kern County the best place in the state to start and grow business. And so with that as my goal, yeah, there's a lot of paperwork and meeting. I mean, there's some of that in the government. Entrepreneurs don't have to do so much of that. So it takes a little getting used to.
So how is it? So before when you were running Stria, I'm sure you got a lot of fulfillment from that. So now what does that look like for you? How do you get your fulfillment now? Because your kids are getting older.
I mean, the fulfillment I have is professionally is trying to help people achieve what they want to achieve. If there's some lessons I've learned in my journey, if I can share those with people, I get a lot of fulfillment from that. And then, just being able to focus more on the family life. That suffered a lot when I was starting growing a business. I definitely, look, there's a calculation that has to be made every day if you're going to be home for dinner at 5:30 or if you're going to stay and do one more proposal or see one more client. And far too often I convinced myself that client, that proposal, that spreadsheet needed to be done, and I'll eat late. And I did that a lot. Did it help make the business successful and make more money? Yes. Right. Did it cost me quality family time I'll never, ever, ever, ever get back? Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, and I think, everybody, it's showed back up again, this work-life balance stuff. And my thing's always like, that balance only works when the fulcrum isn't moving all the time, right?
Right. Yeah.
So if the business is pulling you over, on one hand, you're like, well, I have to do this to provide for my family. But it's easy to get that out of balance where it's like, oh, crap. I thought I was doing what I needed to do.
Yeah. No, I mean, only in retrospect, you go, oh, maybe I could have, been home for dinner at 5:30 and then did some email at night. But, boy, those times you're young and gunning and you go, how am I going to make happy hour with the clients if I don't stay? I mean, it's just, and do entrepreneurs need to make that sacrifice? Maybe, maybe not. But for the entrepreneurs listening, I think it's important to be mindful of how you're going to try and find that. And I agree, the fulcrum is always moving. I don't subscribe to the balance thing. I think that the healthier approach is a blend. Can you blend a work-life blend?
Right.
Yeah. But I'm not an expert on that. So.
Yeah, it's never 50-50, right?
No.
It's not possible to be 50-50.
No. I mean, I really think, especially as a founder, to create a company, to create something, not to get esoteric, but there's energy that goes into creating something. Well, that energy comes from somewhere. Right. That time comes from somewhere. Time is a zero-sum game. You only have 24 hours in the day.
Right.
And you only have so much energy in your life so when you're going to put it into something, you are taking it from somewhere.
Right.
And how you can balance
Einstein energy can be created or destroyed, right?
That's right.
So it's just like time. There's a finite amount of time and energy. And I know back when we were really growing, that was my big thing, was my energy. Like, I'd get home and by the time I'd just be done.
Yeah.
And then thinking about, where am I going to retap this to be ready to go again?
Yeah.
Day after day. And I think it's one of the biggest miscalculations of people becoming entrepreneurs, starting their own businesses, understanding the amount of time it's going to take. Because you just think, like, especially if you've been working in a job, it's like, all right, it's 8 hours. I've got enough extra time.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden you don't.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
What happened?
Like, it's Wednesday night and you go, well, I'm on Monday's to-do list. Almost done. Great.
Right. Yeah.
And everything takes twice as long. Send an invoice, collect money, get a bank account. I mean.
And that to-do list is just growing and growing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a finite amount of resources and an infinite amount of need. I mean, in your business, how many people need physical therapy?
Right.
I mean.
Yeah, there's more than you do. It's that abundance mindset, right? Like, there is so much out there.
Yeah. But it's I mean, you only have 24 hours in the day to like get it done,
and only have so many staff hours.
Yes,
and then you're back to that calculation of, okay, we can hire another therapist, and I think it's one of the interesting things with my mastermind, especially the small people that are starting to grow, is that initial calculation of, okay, is there enough work to hire this next person? Am I taking the chance that I'm going to get it, or I have the work and I need help getting it done? Because if you screw that calculation up the other way, you're starting to lose customers because you can't provide what you said you'd provide.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that equation was always initially like, it's still like, oh, do we open another location? Do we hire more?
Yeah.
Physical therapists are making $100,000, so it's not a small investment. It's like, okay, am I going to get a return on this? How long is it going to take to get the return?
Mm-hmm.
And it's never like oh yeah, okay, we can fill them up. No, they have to be trained. They have to get up to speed.
Yeah.
So that's all investment. So now with everything that's happened, has your definition of success changed?
Oh, totally. Totally changed. I think early on it was revenue, headcount, profit, growth. I mean, those are all indicators of success maybe, but for me, I think it's changed into, what am I contributing to the areas that I'm spending my time? For me, that's success. Is if I'm going to be involved on a board, if I'm going to be involved with a business, if I'm going to be involved with the county government, what am I adding to that wouldn't exist if I weren't there? And that's to me what success is. And I've, been doing this a while, so I don't have to stress too much about, my biweekly take home pay like, it was in the early days. So to me, this definition is really focused more on what can I add? What can I add to the space I'm in, whether it's a board or a company, or my family time,
Right.
when we go on a trip, when we go out to dinner, how am I adding to this value? Am I on my phone checking email to try and
Right.
make a buck? Or am I adding something to this? And for me, it's by adding. What I need to do is be quiet and listen, and, not be the big loud voice at the table every night, and just kind of
be the problem solver.
Yeah. So that to me, that's what success means now is what am I contributing to those areas where I'm spending my time, as opposed to, I think earlier in my career, it was more about what am I taking? How much customers, how much market share, how much dollars, how much square footage, how many pages scanned. That's a take mindset. I think now it's more of a, how can I add value to things? And I think the rest will work out. But it's seasons, right? Seasonality. I don't think your mindset has to shift as you get through your entrepreneurial journey. Otherwise, you're not growing as a human.
Right. Yeah. And that's the whole.
Yeah. That's why podcasts like this exist, right? Human Expedition.
Yeah. And so it is telling the stories about the highs and lows of all of it.
Yeah.
So what's next? What's on the...
Well, I'm actually have loved my time at the County of Kern. I'm finishing up that chapter. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back into your world, Tim. I'm going to go back into the entrepreneurial world. I'm going to do another technology startup here in Kern County. So that starts in January. Yeah. Yeah. So it's, I just couldn't, I couldn't
stay away. The frying pan back into the fire.
That's it. I love the government life. And I thought once I got that job, I'd be there for much longer, but it's been great. But I just, the call of the entrepreneurial life is just, I can't ignore it. And who knows, maybe to my own detriment, but I just love it. And it's who I am now.
And I think that, you mentioned it earlier. And there is something weird that happens mentally. Like when you go into entrepreneurship and have some success, it's like, ooh, I like this. I like to be able to create and grow. And
I mean, I've always thought, one of the most, I think it taps into some weird, like ancestral genetic, exploration vibe that we have as humans. Cause you go, you know what, get on an airplane with you and your credit card and go find a customer, go open up a division, go open up. I mean, to me, that is the most exciting thing in the world. Yeah. You go, I'm going to go to this other city. I'm going to go to some meetings and I'm going to help them solve some problems. And they're going to pay our company to solve those problems. This isn't selling, to a friend or a family. That's like, our ancestors getting on ships, going to explore. Like that's the closest thing we've got. Right. Unless we can go to space or the ocean. I'm not doing that. So to me, the closest thing to like this, like wild adventure we can get is like, let's go build a business.
Right. Let's go take a look.
Yeah. It's so cool. And it's legal.
And it's legal.
It's relatively safe. Like to me, it's like, it's just an adventure.
Yeah. It's not getting in a covered wagon going 3,000 miles
or Donner Party stuff. No, we're not doing that. But it
was a Donner Party dinner for 50 or whatever, like Robin Williams joke. Like.
Yeah. Yeah. So to me, that's it. That's what drives me. And I look forward to doing that.
I think it is interesting though, because I was always, and I never knew why the story of Columbus enamored me so much, but it was like having the guts to get on and go across the world. And they're telling you that the world's flat, that you're probably going to go off the edge and never come back. And he still went and looked. Now, irregardless of all the other stuff that happened.
Well, yeah, we can't judge yesterday's heroes by today's standards.
Right.
We'd have no heroes. So we can, for the purposes of our conversation, look past some of these negatives, and there are plenty. But to just take an example like that where you go, you know what, I might never come back. I might never make it across the ocean. I might not make it to the western frontier in a covered wagon. You know, gosh, Tim, it was only 102 years ago. My great-grandfather, came from Mexico up through Texas. I mean, you coming from Minnesota.
Montana.
I mean, Montana. Oh, sorry. Rewind.
No problem with Minnesota, but.
Yes. You, Tim, coming from Montana. I mean, you didn't know what awaited you in California. And then look at the career moves you had with the Dodgers and then creating your own company. Right. But that's exciting.
And every step of the way, it was always like, man, you're making a mistake, right?
Yeah,
you're going to leave the Dodgers? All right, yeah, well, I think there's something better. But I think there is, and I think that just sums up what you're doing, right? Like, you took the adventure once. It would be easy to say, all right, I did it once. I'm not getting back on the ship, right?
Yep.
But you are.
Yep.
So I think that is that spirit that's something happens, like, I think, when we get into business. So last thing, so having gone through this whirlwind you've been through, if you go back and talk to your 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old self that just coming out of high school, what would you tell them? If you could go back and say, look.
Oh, that's a really good question. Okay. What's the age of our listening audience, Tim? No, just kidding. I think I would like to tell my younger self to reassure that young man that things are going to work out pretty okay, and enjoy the ride, and try not to spend too much energy worrying about what you can't control. I was filled with worry and anxiety as a young person. I still struggle with that, not as much, but as a young person, I really was fearful and anxious about the future. And the fear of failure was just a terrible cloud over my head. The flip side to that is it drove me to do some neat things.
Right.
But I would like to be able to tell my younger self, don't waste too much time with worry about what you can't control. He probably wouldn't listen, but that's what I tell him.
Yeah.
And I think somebody did tell me that. And you know what? I didn't listen.
Hey, you never do.
Yeah.
I think, when somebody asked me that question one time, and when I think back to me coming out of high school, I had no clue the things that would happen. Like YPO and hanging out with these guys, flying on private jets, going on trips that I could have never imagined.
Yeah.
It's like, so I always said, I'd go back and tell my 17, dude, you have no idea what's coming.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be some real highs and some real lows, but just enjoy the ride. Right?
Now, Tim, you have kids. Do you tell and grandkids now? Do you tell your kids that?
Yeah, actually, I had an interesting conversation with one of our therapists a couple of years ago, and they were like, "What's the plan for this company? Like, none of your kids went into. Why didn't any of your kids go into therapy?" And I said, "I told them to go find their life, not live mine."
Yeah.
So now it's, man, I tell you, it's probably my most proud thing is 3 very productive, successful people that I raised. So I was like, all right, I did something right.
Yeah.
And then now I watch them with the grandkids, and they are so much better parents than I was. And I don't know if it's the world and the information that's available now that we didn't have.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I look at both of my daughters, and they astound me with what they know and what they can do. We'll have a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old, and they seem in many ways more astute and insightful and creative and smart than I ever was. And I'm just like, you're going to be okay. And I try and tell them that, and they kind of, sometimes they listen, and sometimes they look at me and go, "What do you know, old man?" And I go, "No, trust me. You're really in good shape, And it's neat to see. We're both blessed with some great
phenomenal
kids,
stuff.
too.
And when you get to that level, man, the grandparent thing is so much cooler.
Okay, all right, we're not there yet.
Yeah, and no rush either for the girls.
For the girls. My brother has 2 little kids, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and Kelly and I are, we're probably about old enough to be grandparents. We're not. They're our nieces, our nephews, and it's really a great joy to see the little tiny 1 and 3-year-old kind of like figuring it out. you
Just
know.
the amount of work.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, again, I appreciate you coming on and telling your story, and I'm glad there was closure on that crazy part. And congratulations on jumping back on the ship and heading out.
Well, I appreciate it, Tim.
Let me know if you need anything on that journey.
I know, and I appreciate you, Tim. You're an entrepreneur's entrepreneur, and I just love you for it. So thank you for what you continue to do for all of us and inspiring us to get on that ship.
Awesome.
All right.